afternoon, everyone. We have a very eminent panel and representatives from RIL, DCM Shriram, and Deepak Fertilizers. Myself, Girish, I represent ICRA, which is a rating agency. Let me just, give some opening remarks in the context. We have a theme for this panel discussion, which is going to deliberate and discuss on the various challenges in the value addition and the diversification initiatives for the Indian petrochemical industry. So that's the theme. So we will deliberate and do some deep dive on this topic. But let me just highlight some of the opening pointers. Certainly, the India being a developing country, and certainly the demand prospects, for the petrochemical products for India are quite strong. And given the fact that, in fact, the per capita petrochemical consumption for India is just 1/3 of the global average. So that speaks a lot in terms of the demand potential. Having said that, the petrochemical industry is inherently cyclical. Of course, the profitability, for the petrochemical companies remains exposed to, of course, the spread movement, the various cyclicality which is inherent in the end user industries, of course, exposure to the rupee dollar movement and import duty levels. So these are the, fundamental issues, for the petrochemical companies. Having said that, major companies in the oil and gas sector, some of the prominent chemical sector companies, they have taken a very significant capex initiatives in the recent past, diversifying into, the value-added petrochemical areas, right? And we are going to deliberate on the opportunities there, the various challenges associated with these diversification initiatives, within the chemical and the petrochemical space. But before that, let me also highlight that of late in the last 1 year, if you look at the overall, the margin performance, the EBITDA level margin performance for various entities in the chemical space, or for that matter in the petrochemical space, have come under pressure because of the deltas and the spreads coming under pressure, essentially because of, the demand pressures overseas, particularly in the European markets, and the fact that there has been a supply glut in China because of China's slowdown, impacting, the overall pricing environment for a number of products, which in turn has impacted, various Indian entities, both chemical as well as petrochemical entities. And this is quite evident over the last, several quarters, particularly in the last 1 year. So these are near-term headwinds, which the chemical companies, petrochemical companies are witnessing. And with that background, we are going to, deliberate on, number of topics in this as part of this panel discussion. So let me just come to, Mr. Gaurav first. How do you see, before we come on the specific point related to challenges, how do you see, the global business environment in terms of, are we witnessing any kind of, demand pressures easing out, favorably impacting the pricing environment for, the petrochemical products or the polymers, aromatic products? Are we seeing some kind of, the demand signs improving in China? How do you see the overall, the global context, before we deep dive into challenges aspects? Yeah.
Sure. In terms of global supply coming up, we do not see by 2025 there will be any incremental gain in the demand side that will improve the margins. Till 2025, I see that there will still be overcapacity and margin pressures. There will be increased competition from advantage feedstock entities, and China will be the dominant player, has already become dominant player in some of the chemicals, and it will further become. Presently, China accounts for global chemical plus petrochemical production of 45%, and it is slated to become close to 61-62% by the end of 2035. So there will be pressures on the margins. In the long term, there is an increased focus on recycling, increased focus on sustainability, and adoption of new technologies. And in future as well, we will see China graduating into low growth regime. And with China going into low growth regime, what will they do with their overcapacity? So we are going to see increased exports from China, while the world will be grappling with weak global demand, particularly in Europe. That's all from my side.
Yeah, interesting. So, Mr. Rajesh, what are your viewpoints? Do you agree with Mr. Gaurav's observations?
Yeah, by all means. First of all, let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers. Mr. Prashant, thank you for inviting me and hosting me as a panelist out here. So, Mr. Kadam, I fully agree with Gaurav because they are more of a petrochemical giants in India, and they have a better vision of the future, having a product basket which is widespread. Coming back to the global scenario, what he said is absolutely correct. I was also reading somewhere that China is building up capacity. I will just give you example of ethylene, which contributes almost around 75% of the basic chemicals that are manufactured across the globe. So China has built up so much capacity, almost 140 million tons have been added. And that basically has created a surplus for ethylene, which for the last 2.5 decades, no company in India was willing to look at putting up a PVC plant, because I am from a PVC industry, so I have a weak knowledge of other polymers. But the feedstock challenge that we had for PVC was so enormous that nobody wants to invest, okay? But as Gaurav is suggesting that they are further building up, more capacities will get operational in the coming 2 to 3 years. I think Indian manufacturers will be most benefited because they will get cheaper ethylene, which can be sourced for not only polyethylenes, it can be also a good source for manufacturing PVC. PVC industry today is dominated by imports because of demand-supply imbalance. We are falling short of almost 2 million tons of capacity per annum. And no plant is coming up in India. Of course, Reliance has announced some capacities which might come around 26. Similarly, Adani's have announced some capacities which might also come around a similar time frame. But the real challenge for all of us in this industry is the availability of basic building blocks, including ethylene.
Okay, great. Yeah, please.
I didn't mention about the situation for petrochemical in India. There we will have a sustained domestic demand, and our industry will grow at the rate of 11%, 11 to 12% in years to come. And if I talk about polymer, it will be 25% increase in the demand, 12% for polyester, while there will be 5% increase in demand for crude oil. So these are the various numbers. So India as such has a growth story in terms of petrochemical demand, but we have sustained pressure on the margins. So we are going to see a regime in which there will be volume growth, but lower profitability. Thirdly, on PVC front, which Sir told, PVC is a product in which we are in a severe deficit, and India really needs to build PVC capacity in spite of whatever happens away from India or across the globe. But we do need PVC, and there are various challenges with setting up a PVC facility, which we will be discussing it later.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Gaurav. Let me come to Mr. Anand. You represent Deepak Fertilizers. You are a leading player in ammonium nitrate and, nitric acid and the downstream products. How do you assess the current situation for you, for your operations?
In fact, as others also shared, the domestic demand is good. But when we say the margin compression, what we are looking at is that the reinvestment economics are not working. So you will just scrape through above the raw materials, so you will sustain. To sustain, you might have to continuously work internally because the external market is not going to help you enough. So how you can reduce your cost, how you can maximize the service to the customer so that the customer stickiness. So you need to do on the fringes. That's what I think most of the big companies are working on. And that's what we are also focusing on. And that's the only way to sustain. The moment the tide changes, there is where the reinvestment economics will start working. But chemical as always comes in steps. So people who understand the cycle all through the cycle know that when to get in and when to get out. But nobody can have a real crystal ball. So if you get in at the wrong step, that is where then you get into a much more bigger debts on your books and then you suffer. I think otherwise India is very promising story from a demand perspective. That's why the whole global players are looking at India as a place. And India has its own inherent strength for the Indian place to succeed. Because a lot of MNCs are still sitting on the edge. I think that is where as Indian companies, if we start investing more and more, we can capture a lot of that future growth.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the unanimous observation from all of you, is that India offers a tremendous demand potential, no doubt about it. See, the opportunities are immense, and in that context, let me come to Mr. Gaurav again. So, how do you see the diversification initiatives, the capex initiatives into these value-added downstream products? What kind of opportunities that you are seeing, and what are the specific challenges that you would like to highlight?
In terms of diversification, India is in deficit of 45%. 45% is the number we import intermediates into India. And even though we are close to self-sufficient at bulk petrochemicals, but it is the intermediate where there is a problem. And why it is a problem? Because of various reasons. One is the technology transfer. There are certain players who requires you to either enter into a pay or take agreement. There are very few licenses, like if one wants to go into super adsorbent polymer or acrylic acid, one has to buy the technology from a selected licenses only and then give the product to them only. That is the problem. So India is deficit in SAP and acrylic acid, but one cannot set up a facility for these plants. Second is the co-location. There must be, the demand is spread everywhere, but the production can happen at one place. And we need to strengthen our logistics to have a right transportation, and so that we do not face competition from those who have advantage feedstocks. Third is CVD or a tariff duty structure. This is another challenge. It is kept in such a way that it still attracts imports on the intermediates front. It should ideally be, there should be more taxation on the intermediates rather than on the building block. But at this present situation, intermediates import is still lucrative, which it should not be. Lastly, there are certain other challenges when we diversify. Let us say if somebody wants to produce, venture into oxo alcohol, but one cannot set up a facility for carbon monoxide, or if there is any other particular chemical, you cannot set up a facility for very niche chemical product. And for that niche chemical product, if some other product is used, then it becomes impossible to invest that much capex in entire value chain. For example, sir mentioned about PVC. For PVC, even if a player as big as us, or maybe Adani, if we want to invest, we have to invest in alkali as well. We have to invest in chlorine as well. Or how we will produce EDC. Or we have to import EDC. And if we set up a chlor-alkali business within our facilities, it is hazard for us to have chlorine in our refinery complex. We do not want to deal with chlorine in our complex. So this is why we don't want to get into alkali or in such business where we have to handle chlorine or caustic. Then there are certain other challenges like products like butadiene. You cannot transport that product. The downstream person has to be at your gate only. Then only one can make any meaningful product out of butadiene, otherwise it polymerizes easily. So there are challenges like this. Then when we talk about diversification, it has to be closely integrated into the clusters, and it should have a close integration with ports as well. Suppose we want a very niche chemical which has challenges like immediate polymerization or which needs to be transported into a cold condition or in a hot condition, our port should be capable of handling those products, and it should be able to come to the processing complex. Lastly, capex investment. For capex investment, India do justify a world scale capacity for most of the niche petrochemical. But if another such capacity comes across the globe who have a advantageous feedstock, then this investment which has already been made, it gets into sync. And we need a protection from a policy regulator point of view. If those kind of investments are made, we need a kind of assurance from the duty structure point of view or from a countervailing duty point of view that it will be protected. Lastly, there are certain niche chemicals or petrochemicals which need adjacencies from feedstock, from consumption, and from a downstream point of view. As such, only western part of India, and in particular certain clusters in the Gujarat region, they only provide such kind of luxury to have such niche chemicals in India. But the demand for those certain chemicals does exist outside of Gujarat region as well. So that's all from my side.
Yeah, so Gaurav, I think you touched upon very lots of insightful points, in terms of the challenges and the nuances, applicable for, the niche, chemical ventures, whether it is technology, transportation, co-location requirements, logistical infra, some kind of policy support, and so on and so forth. So let me come to, Mr. Rajesh. So you represent, you are a prominent and a very reputed, player in the chloroalkali segment. What is the assessment and what is your perspective into while diversifying into, value-added chemicals and new areas? Yeah.
Basically, yeah, we have been expanding quite rapidly in the past couple of years into chloralkali. Okay. But the real challenge for us is to handle chlorine. What do we do with the chlorine? How do we get rid of it? I mean, that's the right word that we have to use as a manufacturer, not to be mentioned actually here, but it's a big challenge and it's a big threat for the entire complex where we are operating. Okay. So the obvious answer to that, as Gaurav said, is basically we have to look for products which can absorb this chlorine. Okay. Now, the product which the world uses to absorb the chlorine maximum is PVC. And there are inherent problems in making or putting up a PVC plant because of the feedstock issues. So that option is, on the fences currently. So the other options left for us was to sort of develop into specialty chemicals. Okay, even when we get into those products, either you have the technology, then, there are so many players into it because technology becomes common in India very quickly. I mean, it's not a guarded technology. Secondly, if you don't have the technology, you have to depend on a foreign supplier. And who will guard the technology, who will, sort of not give you the real keys of, building on that technology. So it's like, you're dependent on them for building up the products. And the challenge is the viability, the taxation as the government policies. They become sort of challenging for us And to some extent, all this set apart, like, okay, Indian government is also helpful in, giving some relief to the manufacturers who want to really invest. And in the last 3 to 4 years, during COVID and post-COVID, government has been proactive in pushing, investments into the manufacturing. But the real challenge is today, China. They have got this products and the kind of capacity which they have. They make all your economics unviable. They are dumping products into the country, and we are not able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
So practically when you put in, let's say, 500,000 crores in manufacturing a specialty chemical, and you are not being protected by your own government, basically then your investment is at stake. And that is where we again go to the government and say that please help us and sort of let us have some measures to protect the Indian manufacturers who want to really invest, who want to really help the Indian government to create employment, because more the investment, more the employment. So we are trying our best to convince the government to give some relief to the Indian manufacturer. But yes, Indian government is also looking at manufacturers that you have to become competitive. But, it is easier said than done. Today, power is one of the major inputs. And if you compare with your neighboring countries, and especially with China, you're nowhere close to, the power cost, which they get. The power is subsidized in China. You don't have any subsidies on your power. In fact, your power tariffs are just shooting up. So it's like labor, yes, it is on the cheaper side. But, when you put all these inputs together and try to see the viability of the projects, somehow it is not really materializing into a win-win situation for the Indian manufacturers. So what we look for is, yes, all Indian manufacturers have great ideas to sort of get into specialty chemical, get into niche products, get into import substitution is the right word, okay? But then we need greater support from the government to ensure that we are able to sustain those initial years when our investments are at stake.
Yeah.
So,
Certainly.
yeah.
Yeah, certainly. You made a very, very insightful point against the import competition and the policy support that is required. We'll deliberate further on that policy supports after this point. But let me come to Mr. Anand. You represent Deepak Fertilizers, and Deepak Fertilizers is a leading player in ammonium nitrate, nitric acid, and so many other downstream products. So how are you seeing, your diversification into value-added segment? What kind of challenges that you are seeing? Yeah.
On value-added segment, when I see certain challenges, sometimes maybe in the past we have not invested so much on R&D. Now that comes to hurt, because at some point of time you're running the plant and milking that more. Then you not invested at the right time for the right things. Then when you want to do something very special, it becomes a challenge. So then you start from a scratch, because some of those technologies are not available for sale, because somebody is protecting, because there is value to it. Then you start today and then start developing. So that's what we realized it some time back, and then started investing in those, and then developing niche products for the downstream industry. How can we value add in those? Like we are focusing on steel, we are focusing on solar industry, we are trying to focus on semiconductor industry. Though these are basic building blocks, how can you add value there? That is where we see the value coming in. And on some of the topics which we just spoke about in terms of challenges, how we can diversify, I think sometimes I personally feel maybe our own entrepreneurial spirit is a problem. I'll tell you why. Because we like to do all ourselves. That is where we get stuck. I think still the element of collaboration between different companies, it's still not happening enough. It can happen much more. Like for example, say Reliance might have one material of say 20,000 tons which a downstream chemical would have needed. Reliance might feel, let me do that myself, right? And same it for me also, or for any other company. If we can little bit do a give and take, I think there is where we can do much more. And sometimes I also feel our say policies and rules sometimes don't allow. If I have to put another 5 companies within my site, the regulations doesn't allow it. They make a hurdle rather than making it happen, because sometimes these regulations are made for across the industry, not specific, because chemicals, as long as you connect through pipeline and get it and transfer and get it back, global sites, you can see so many sites in one single site, multiple companies working. Somebody just handles the effluent from that site and then they make a business out of it. Today, if I have to transport the effluent, that does not make my primary product not so viable. I think some of these rules and regulations, if we can relook at for industry specific, how can we enable it? And as business, how we can work together, I play in this space, you play in that space, that kind of thing, if can be done, I think diversification will happen much more faster. Because external help is not going to come for us. As a country, we have not invested, not every company has invested so much in technology. Our educational institutions are now catching up on how to support the industry. I think it's a journey. I think if all of us can collaborate together, we can do much more faster.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Anand, for your perspective. So let me come to another topic related to the environmental risk and the concerns associated in the industry. So, Gaurav, you first, how are you seeing the environmental concerns, while expanding, while diversifying, and what kind of risk mitigation strategies that you are seeing, and what kind of capex initiatives are being thought of, to move towards the net zero carbon transition over the medium to long term?
First of all, I would like to thank him for the collaboration thing. Definitely we need such collaboration, like they have chlorine available with them. We don't want to handle caustic, but we want chlorine for making PVC. Similarly, we also have certain various feed which can be given to other facilities and they can make something out of it. Yeah. So coming on to the environmental concern, there is an increased demand on increased focus on environment in petrochemical industry. We are focusing high on recycle now. If you take Reliance as an example, in the morning itself, Mr. Sardana informed that we are recycling a huge amount of PET and PET bottles, and we are making fabric out of it, which is called as our Elan. Second is we are reusing plastic. We are building roads in our own facility by recycling plastic and plastic wrappers and all kinds of plastic dump we have. Thirdly, Reliance is doing a lot of, say, consumption of plastic use internally, like our own polypropylene, polyethylene films, etc. They are being increasingly used in our geo retail and in other businesses. Telephone towers, the fibers for the covering for the fibers for geo are now made from Reliance own plastic, and this is what we are doing. So we are trying to we are trying to focus more on made in India or on Atmanirbharta and reduce our carbon footprint in terms of importing or taking from someone else, or so we are sourcing things locally. This is one of the things which we are doing in petrochemicals. Secondly, on our process facilities, we are saving we are doing pinch analysis for energy, water, and every other thing we use can make carbon footprint lower. So we are reducing footprint on our operation side. Thirdly, there is an increased focus on the technology front. We are doing digitization. We are making dashboards. We are making an end-to-end view on our CO2 emissions, on our carbon footprints, etc. So that if we have measurement, we can measure, mitigate, and then eliminate. We also are focusing on increased use of recycled material into our own facilities. So let us say my presently plant is operating at 100% fresh feed. If I can recycle, if I can absorb some of the recycled material into it, we are looking after that. Lastly, electrification. We are planning to have electrification of cracker, which are huge energy guzzlers, and some of the facilities which have already been done these kind of things in Netherlands. We are studying that, and we will be coming up with POC on electrification of cracker and turbines, drives, and all other equipment, even the extruder for the polyethylene and polypropylene. So these are the things which we are doing on environment front and reducing our carbon footprint.
But to what extent, just a supplementary question, to what extent it will have a cost impact on the cost structure of these products, and do you assess the viability at this stage?
Yes, of course. In fact, all these have a economic focus.
Okay.
They will reduce the per ton cost of production because we are using recycled material instead of completely fresh feed. Since we are going towards energy efficiency, so our cost of production goes low. In electrification as well, it's not that just we want to do. There must be an economic reason for that.
Okay.
So when we are doing a capex investment, we are also evaluating whether my cost will justify it or not.
Okay. That's
And lastly, since we are also exporter for some of the nations, so if there is an hypothetical case on a border carbon trading mechanism, so we want to future-proof our operations as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, Mr. Rajesh, what about how you think environmental concern currently for your business? What are the risk mitigation strategies that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I see two sides to it. One is from the business perspective, in the sense that if you want to really put up a new plant, for example, the kind of permissions, that one has to obtain to set up that plant probably delays your project by 2 to 3 years. Okay, unless you really have a hold over the government. Okay. Now, that is one side of it where, yes, environmental concerns are definitely important. Every manufacturer has to take care of, environment and ensure that they are not polluting the environment. But government has to also see about, how quickly they can give these clearances. Typically, for our PVC projects, like what I see from co-producers, they are getting their clearances probably over 2 years or 3 years, okay? And that's the kind of time frame. And the entire project gets, further cascaded over the next 5 to 10 years. So that is one side of it, which I think government has to ensure that there has to be a fast mechanism to sort of give these clearances. Yes, provided you have the necessary infrastructure in place to take care of the environmental issues raised by the government in that particular plant setup. Coming to the business per se, every company today has been mandated to take sustainable measures for doing the business. Okay, sustainability can be with a small measure like zero discharge plant. Okay, the entire complex is a zero discharge complex. So that it's a small drop in the ocean. Okay, but that also helps us in saving costs. Then something like your solar. Okay, I don't know, the other companies are also doing it. But at our plant, basically we are moving maximum facilities where it is possible. We are shifting it on solar power. To the extent that even the manufacturing process, part of the power requirements are being catered by solar. And the plan is to further upgrade it over the next 5 to 10 years. We also have a power plant in the premises. So there is also, mandatory conversion of your capacity every year on solar. So that is one of the compulsions that we have, but we are not restricting ourselves to that compulsion and, trying to add further so that we are able to get some benefit out of this solar implementation for our, power requirements.
Okay, great. Insightful, Mr. Rajesh. So, Mr. Anand, how are you seeing the environmental concern as an angle, and what kind of initiatives, capex initiatives that you have taken, and how do you address that situation? And also, you have a sizable presence in ammonia. And just very quickly, what are your thoughts on green ammonia in future? Yeah.
In fact, I would say that if the government would have applied the norms they wanted for the NOx and SOx abatement, we could have put one more new plant for ammonia. Because that's what ammonia is end of the day used for abatement and some of the technology. So that way it can bring in opportunity as well. But what we had been doing ourselves is that some of our plants that we installed in the past were second-hand plants. Now we suffer some of the, when we do the retrofitting or bring it to a level where you have to meet the norms or the future norms, there is a lot of investment is required. Given that learning exercise, now all the new plants or the capex that we're investing, everything we are looking at, will it qualify for the future requirement? Then only we'll go for the technology. Otherwise, we are putting that as part of our overall future retrofitting versus we are looking that also and making our capex investment today. So that steps we are already taking. On the green ammonia, all of us know that end of the day, the hydrogen defines cost. What is the future cost? All of us are waiting for some level of new technology to come in and reduce the hydrogen cost. In fact, on that front, in some of the forums, I have been asking, while people are talking about green ammonia, they're also looking at transporting green ammonia. I'd been challenging them, why you want to transport and again create carbon? Why not you take a certificate? Why not you develop a system of, because ammonia is same. Whether it's green or gray, ammonia is same. How you generate your hydrogen qualifies you for green. So why you have to transport to another country? You give a certificate, they can buy it there, at least to that extent carbon can be neutralized. But all this ecosystem has to develop. Like the technology has to develop, the ecosystem has to develop to make it more commercially viable. But it will be viable. Everybody is hoping that and everybody says that ammonia is going to be the first chemical in scale that could be much more viable. Then methanol can come in, multiple chemicals can come in as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Anand. Very helpful, very insightful. So let's come to the policy angle now. We deliberated on number of areas so far in the panel discussion. So, Mr. Gaurav, so what are the policy support mechanism that is expected from, in your perspective, to address some of the fundamental issues that you highlighted and the challenges? So, what are the key points that you expect in the form of policy support? In fact, there have been policy measures, for the chemical industry. What has, in your opinion, what has been the progress so far, and what has been the implementation challenges on those policy front?
Sure. Before I add up on the policy side, on environment front, we are further planning to have CO2 absorption from our some of our facility and use that CO2 to produce e-methanol and other. That is still in development stage, but that is if it picks up, it will be a path-breaking thing for the petrochemical industry. Now on the policy front, as I told that 45% we are deficit on the intermediates front. So we want support from the government to have a favorable tariff mechanism so that a manufacturer who wants to put up facility for intermediates manufacturing gets the right kind of support, on the duties front. At least that should be protected. So one is tariffs. Second, we want environment clearance side, faster environment clearance and lesser conditions on TORs and the to and fro moving, because by the time the project comes up, the demand supply gap or scenario changes completely. This is another thing which thirdly is formation of clusters, because there are certain products which require adjacencies, like for example for PVC, if we have been in cluster, we would have consumed their chlorine and the problem of disposal of chlorine would have been solved. So if clusters are formed for petrochemicals and for that required infrastructure is given, for small downstream consumers, there is a arrangement like in PCPIR, there is a utility company which can provide water, electricity, etc. as a utility. Apart from that, even hydrogen, nitrogen, or even if somebody needs CO2 as a utility, if that kind of thing is provided, then small downstream producers can easily integrate with PCPIR kind of mechanism where building block is provided by an anchor tenant and then downstream can consume that. Lastly, to support Indian petrochemical industry, we also need kind of arrangement which prevents the huge dumping of petrochemicals, particularly from advantageous feedstock nations. So either we should have a viability gap funding for the capital project we invest, or we at least need a support wherein duties are framed in a manner that advantageous feedstock based products are treated at par within the boundaries of our country.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mr. Gaurav. So, Mr. Rajesh, you also highlighted very significantly on this import competition part,
Yeah.
which Gaurav highlighted. So, what do you think? Is the tariff barrier is the solution to address this import competition, or you also highlighted there are challenges to ensure the cost structure and the cost competitiveness. But to what extent the tariff barriers will help to against the import competition?
I feel it is equally important. Tariff barriers, in fact, we've been pushing the government for quite some time. And basically, why we need those tariff barriers is to protect our investments. Okay, because any petrochemical project run into thousands of crores. The cost of capital is very high as compared to cost of capital anywhere in the world. Okay, so it is very important that government has to consider this. Your inputs are very expensive, so which makes your product very expensive as compared to a product which is manufactured outside the country. What we have been insisting is, like I'll use this forum to just voice my opinion out here, if you permit.
Please.
Okay. Basically, we've been deliberating with DCPC. Unfortunately, I was not there in the morning. I think if Mr. Deepak Mishra would have attended this session. We've been interacting with him regularly for past 2 to 3 years now. Okay, and we've been trying to convince them the same thing, that it's all about, see, one has to be competitive, it is fine. It's very easier to say but it's very difficult to achieve. Problem with us is that India has all the high cost components, and abroad, basically your finance is cheap, your labor is okay, expensive as compared to India, but their technology is cheap, especially China. So that sort of has got a very, you can say, negative impact on the Indian industry, in the sense that we always insist, DCPC, that all these manufacturers who are dumping the material to India, why don't they set up a plant in India? Let them set up a plant in India, we are okay, then they will be like co-producers to us. We will be friendly with them, we have no issues. If these plants are set up in India, you have people like Formosas, you have people like LG, who have been doing business in India for the last 30 years. And their businesses are growing, but they hesitate to put up a plant in India. Okay? Formosa, who is one of our largest producers in Southeast Asia. Why is he not putting up a plant if he is pushing in 25,000-30,000 tons of material every month? You talk of Japan. We have FTAs with Japan. Okay? Now, who's the beneficiary of FTAs? The Japanese government and the Japanese industrial producers. It's not India. So why are we not doing something about it? We are challenging the FTAs, but government is helpless because Japan is giving a lot of funding to Indian metro projects. So they are helpless. In metros, they are taking away your money to Japan. What are we doing about it? So frankly, what I feel is all these countries which are pumping material into India, because India is a very vibrant country. We've got a huge population which is generating this awesome demand which no other country in the world today has. Now, the entire world is milking India at a cheaper cost of production. They are dumping the goods to India, and who are the sufferers? Indian producers, because they are put to massive income taxes, they are put to various direct, indirect taxes. There are duty structures, tariffs. During COVID, our duties were all of a sudden overnight reduced from 10% to 7.5% because now Indian consumers should get the benefit. But that duty benefit was never passed on to the Indian consumers, that was pocketed by all the exporters. So this is what we've been trying to tell the government that, see, we want quality material to come into India, number one. For that, what we need is a QCO, a BIS in place. CIPET has been working on this. We've been dealing with DCPC and pushing them to implement BIS for polymers. Okay, that will ensure that all the producers who are pushing the material to India will comply with the Indian quality standards.
Is that, just sorry interrupting you. So is
Yeah.
that helping because BIS norms for polypropylene are in place, right? Since
They
October.
are announced, but they are still not implemented.
Not yet implemented.
No, they are
Okay.
still not implemented. Probably, I think
Will that
Gaurav
help?
might have a better
Yeah,
idea.
For polypropylene, even if we have norms, but we are surplus in polypropylene. I'm just sharing this for the audience purpose. India is having surplus in C2, 4 and 6. So wherever there is an even number, India is surplus. 1, 3, 5 and 7. It is where India is in deficit. So C1, 3, 5 and 7 is
Okay.
toluene is so
Okay.
in the products like polypropylene, benzene, etc., we are anyway in surplus. So if even if you have a BIS code, we are sending the product out, not taking the products in.
Right. Okay. That's great.
Whereas when it comes to PVC, basically you are in deficit. Okay, and when 2 million tons of product is coming into the country in a year, it's not a small volume. Okay, so what we are insisting is that to help Indian producers, that let us have, and typically, the rest of the world is still following a quality parameter, but when it comes to China, the challenge starts because there are all sorts of qualities that are coming into India. So what we insist is that we should have a BIS in place. A DCPC has QCO, which needs to be announced. Okay, the customs duty needs to be, reverted back to 10%, which has been very ad hoc basis dropped to 7.5%. Anti-dumping duties must be put in place to protect the Indian investments. Today, Reliance is putting up, I think, around 1.5 million tons of PVC capacity. Adanis are putting in almost 29,000-30,000 crores worth of PVC investments. So who is going to protect this investment? I think it's part of Indian government duty to ensure that all these producers are finally Indians and they are bringing in more employment. They are trying to create Atmanirbhar Bharat, which everybody is talking about. Some people are implementing. So I think it is government's job to ensure that we put this, structures in place to ensure that Indian producers do not hesitate to invest.
Right.
Today, there is a lot of hesitation that what will happen to my thousands of crores of investment. If government reverts back to from 7.5, they will bring the duty down to 5%. Then the competitive edge is gone. Then the point which Gaurav had made, I think, sometime back on the intermediaries. I mean, you are loading taxes on intermediaries, okay, and you are making the Indian product, which is a finished product, expensive. If that product is manufactured in India and is getting traded in India, then it's a different issue altogether. When that product is not manufactured, not available in India, I'm talking about ethylene, I'm talking about EDC, I'm talking about VCM, all these products are not available for merchant trade in India. Okay, so why are we levying duties, basically? So you must, reduce the duties or take out the duties and make your producers competitive. Okay. So, I mean, these are the issues on the tariffs that we are raising about. So I think it's just a plea to the Indian government that they should hear to us and act as fast as possible before, the companies start dropping the plans of going for any further expansions.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Rajesh. They were very, very insightful points on that front. Mr. Anand, what are your findings and what are your,
Yeah, since they have
perspectives?
touched upon the tariff, the FTA, anti-dumping, so I'm not going to repeat that. That's the most important point. Apart from that, one additional point that I see is also one of the reasons why all the people from Far East are able to approach here, because most of the chemicals are in West Coast. For me to West Coast to supply to East Coast, it costs at least around $120 to $140 per ton. For them, it takes $60 to $80. So for them, though having a plant outside of India and not having as is anything of India, they are making much more money than me putting a plant sitting in India. So logistically, I think we should work very differently to make it much more better. Today, if I do a coastal movement, only Indian flag vessels are allowed. How many Indian flag vessels are there in India to do a coastal movement? So if government can invest in some of those infrastructure to make it more cost effective to move goods around, it could be rail network, it could be multimodal, then that can add $40-50 to all the manufacturers. So this is an indirect way of bringing in employment, building infrastructure and adding money to the investors also. I think some of these points also government should seriously work on, and this will not happen tomorrow. This need time, but some government has to start it today so that this can enable many more things much more fast. Like for example, Europe, all the way to Russia, by rail it moves all the way to the other end of Europe. US it runs because they are so cost effective. In fact, since I've been working in Dow before, Dow owns highest number of rail wagons globally, even better than any other railway company. So to that extent, it makes life much more easier and cost effective. I think we need to invest on those.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anand. Gaurav, you wanted to add one more point.
As sir mentioned on Atmanirbhar Bharat, so there is a huge investment, and then we are seeding up demand in India for differentiated products. And since this topic was about diversification, so not just Reliance, it must be Indian Oil and other public sectors as well. We are finding petrochemical application in niche areas, and the areas wherein petrochemical application was not there, like wind, solar. We are finding some of the material, if they can be used in wind application, solar application, even other plastics. Like we are making a product called CPVC. If you have seen Astral, there is a pipe company called Astral. So it has a niche application in bathroom and all those areas. So there the pipes used are CPVC pipes. So Indian industry is definitely moving into various certain areas wherein they are finding new application, but we of course need protection, which sir highlighted. Further, like Reliance on its own is investing in use of plastics and petrochemicals in home decor. From a B2B company, we are trying to be B2C as well by pushing some of the product in the retail business, like Railwood. It is a it is a PVC and it is a plastic, but it has exact wooden finish. So further, Reliance has acquired Chemrock, and this is a carbon fiber manufacturing facility. So carbon fiber along with other petrochemicals, we are trying to make products like somebody must have seen 3E coaches in railways. So it is not made of steel, it is made of a very hard material, that is carbon fiber, and some of the material is also PVC as well. So this is all I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you.
And for new energy, we are also trying to make membranes from polyethylene, which will be used in green ammonia and green hydrogen production. That's all.
Yeah. So thank you, Gaurav. So these are very green applications that you just elaborated. Mr. Anand, do you want to highlight any green applications from in your perspective, from your side?
In fact, we have been working, looking at the green methanol or the green IPA. So that's what we are also looking at, talking to some of our customers to understand what value they can play. I think there is where even some of our customers are still not clear about what value they can pay, what value they can get from their customer. I think it's a At this point of time, it's more about discussions and evolving with those, I would say.
That's great. So I think we have deliberated on number of topics as part of this panel theme. We discussed a lot about business outlook, margin pressures for the petrochemical entities which are likely to persist in the near to medium term. We discussed on various challenges while diversifying into value-added segments, the specialty product segments. We discussed the kind of opportunities that India offers in the new age and the green applications, which Gaurav also mentioned. We discussed policy, measures which are required. Certainly, the policy support is required, given the high level of capital investment and the kind of import competition that we are seeing, in the chemical and the petrochemical space, and that's a unanimous, the ask, in the panel. That some kind of a tariff barrier is required, and we have seen the kind of import competition which is there, which has hurt the margin profile of many entities. So thank you panelists, and it has been a really wonderful and insightful discussion today. Thank you.